When you don't have transitional housing or you don't have good sheltering systems, people will find alternatives like justice, like health. And so we thought, well, what happens when they come out in and out of those systems? And if we treated that like a system in itself, what would that look like? And so we started really talking about people falling into a situation that they couldn't get themselves out of. That it's actually not self-perpetuated, it's actually system created. That system creation is what we're talking about as far as a TAP.
Today we're joined by Colleen Christopherson-Cote, a systems change leader who's spent years mapping the cracks people fall through. From justice to health to housing, Colleen helps us understand why the bathtub keeps overflowing and who controls the tap. Colleen, welcome to the Speakeasy.
Thanks for having me.
The very first inaugural episode of the Speakeasy.
Oh, I feel special. Thank you.
Yes, I do too. Thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time. Yeah. And Donna, welcome.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Pleasure to be here.
Yeah, this is exciting.
It is very exciting.
Yeah.
And I'm super excited that the first guest is Colleen.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, no pressure.
So system taps, why don't you walk us through?
I think that term system tap was coined by a group of us who were working at the Saskatoon Housing Initiatives Partnership SHIP pre-COVID. And we were really interested in trying to figure out the continuum of services in housing. And so we did a mapping project and asked all the service providers, like, what do you do? Not what your website says you do, and not what you tell funders you do, or not what you sort of advertise in a brochure, but like, what do you do on a day-to-day basis? And where do people come and go from while you're doing that? And it opened up this conversation with a really huge gap that there are a lot of folks doing amazing work on frontline, but there is this lack of continuity and connectivity in that work. And there's a lack of a narrative around why we work so hard to help so many people, and there's always a lineup. So where is the lineup coming from? And so we had this big conversation with the providers around, like, where are the folks coming from that you're helping? Because you help 30 people today and there's 100 tomorrow. Why? And so that led to this conversation around, well, there's some of them are just, falling on hard times and falling into a system, but some of them are being purposely dropped into the system. And so dropped into the homelessness system or dropped into the community system. And we wanted to know where they were getting dropped in from. And so it led us to this bigger conversation. We wanted to try to visualize it as well. And so the continuum, we all sort of know the housing continuum. And we know that the for-profit end of the housing continuum, sort of market housing, even affordable housing for that matter, is where people are investing their dollars, and particularly government, but also private investments go into that end of the continuum. And what we're not getting is really cohesive and adequate investment in the other side of the continuum, which is the not-profit government's social side of housing. And when we don't do that, then we start to see people falling into other systems to seek those services. And so when you don't have transitional housing or you don't have good sheltering systems, people will find alternatives because people are in survival mode and they want to survive. And so they fall into other systems like justice, like health, and others. Those are the two big ones. And so we thought, well, what happens when they come out in and out of those systems? And if we treated them if we treated that like a system in itself, what would that look like? And so we started really talking about people falling into a situation that they couldn't get themselves out of. That it's actually not self-perpetuated, it's actually system created. And so that system creation is what we're talking about as far as a TAP. Okay, so I talk about this bathtub. When there's kids playing in the bathtub is overflowing. And so if you think about the systems as this bathtub, the solution to the overflowing bathtub, there are multiple solutions to it. But right now, the way we're dealing with overflowing bathtubs is scooping the water out with like cups and then putting the cups all around the community and saying good enough. And the cups are fine for the water that's in the cup, but there's still water in the tub flowing over the tub and onto the floor. But also the cups deteriorate over time, right? We lose funding, we lose programming. And so what happens to the water in the cup? It goes back into the tub. And so there's this perpetual cycle, and no one ever stops to think about the two other options, right? There's a plug, but I don't believe that human systems have a stop where you can stop providing them. So if the tap isn't shut off, it will still continuously run over. So why do we come up to the bathtub that's overflowing and stare at it and think, I know what the solution is, to scoop the water out with a bucket, instead of looking at the tap itself?
So when you talk about cups, you're talking about organizations like Prairie Harm Reduction, like Mustard Seed, like Lighthouse, like all of these. Is
Yeah,
that
Salvation Army, all the
Wellness
great,
Center.
amazing,
Mhm.
all of the amazing service providers are responding to
Mhm.
the circumstances that they're given. None of them are told that we're allowed to touch the taps. They're told that you have to apply for funding and get a new cup. And
Mm.
so then they're constantly trying to find resources to buy new cups to scoop the water out to try to solve the problem
Mhm.
that is really actually perpetuated and generated by the cycle of the tap.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And that who owns that tap? Who is pushing people into the tub? If you think about, all of those folks are providing, like the agencies that you just said, are providing excellent frontline service.
Mhm.
But it's never ending.
Mhm.
Right. And so why is it never ending? It's never ending because the system has been allowed to generate and perpetuate the cycle of that need.
Mhm.
So
You mentioned some people are being dropped into these circumstances purposely. What do you mean
yeah,
by purposely?
yeah. So I think there's public policy in place right now where systems don't think that they know they butt up against each other. So they know, so the Ministry of Justice knows that it butts up against, say, Ministry of Health or Ministry of Social Services. They all know that they interact with each other. But what they don't seem to want to do is bridge between each other or create sort of like a weaving. So there's a continuum in between where this is the jurisdiction of justice or this is the jurisdiction of health that is a bit of a gray zone, right? And so if we don't weave services together in those areas and understand that it's not a silo that's a hard wall against another hard wall, there is actually a need for it to be more nimble, then we'll continually have these cycles.
Yeah.
So I'm always sort of talking about release from systems like medical discharge. So we know lots of folks seek health, one of the most expensive systems.
Mhm.
They seek health for a variety of different reasons, health reasons, obviously, but they also seek health for shelter, particularly in winter or in extreme situations. And so folks will show up in the health system seeking shelter.
You said when they can't access housing systems, they'll access justice systems, they'll access health systems. And maybe we can unpack that now. And you started to talk about it and you said they'll access health systems for shelter. Like, what does that mean? And what does that mean? How does someone access the justice system for shelter? Like, let's unpack that a little bit.
Sure. So we'll start with health because it's a little less alarming, maybe. So people will show up at Emerge or show up at clinics and wait for service.
Mhm.
So they're getting sheltered in that process.
Mhm.
It's not that they're not sick, because folks often have multiple
Complexities.
and wellness issues. So they're there. But the health system is not equipped to shelter them in the means in which they need to become well, and so they'll show up at Emerge. They'll get the medical attention, hopefully, that they need, and then they're just discharged back. And oftentimes, and particularly during COVID, we saw this a lot. But even coming out of COVID, we're still seeing it, where medical discharge to the street, or medical discharge to Prairie Harm, or medical discharge to a cab. The cab shows up at Station 20 West. We see people coming from medical discharge still in their hospital gowns, not with nothing that they came in with. We're seeing medical discharge at like Friday at 4:30 in the afternoon when nothing is open. We're seeing medical discharge on weekends, those kind of things. And it's not to say that the health system should be housing people. It's not what I'm saying. That's very expensive and not a solution. But when the policy is creating a space where it's okay to just say, so you're not our patient or client or relative here, but we don't know where you need to go. And so there's no bridge or weaving together of those two things. And if we could talk about policy, like maybe we don't medically discharge after 4:30, would it be more expensive, and defining expense from a financial perspective but also from a social capital perspective, right? Is it more expensive to hold someone till the next morning to be able to match them together with Prairie Harm or the Wellness Center or whoever else they could match them with? Or is it more or less expensive to say, sorry, our service ends here, we don't have anything else for you, see you later?
Having some frontline experience myself, I did have folks discharged to our organization, and then we scrambled, but we couldn't find anything, and then they were reluctant to access shelter because of safety concerns. And so, as a frontline worker, you're going, I don't know what to do.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to reflect back on COVID because we had this happen multiple times during COVID, and thinking about the circumstances that kept us all at home. And the reason that the interagency response was born in Saskatoon was because we knew folks that were previous to this time already food and housing and income insecure were going to be left out of anything that would come from responses.
Right.
So in having those conversations, particularly with homeless population and health, we said we can't house people who could potentially be positive in the shelter system.
Right.
So there needs to be an alternative shelter system for this purpose. So this thing was born called ACES. It stands for something. Don't ask me what the acronym is because we just call it ACES. It operated entirely through the entire response. And it was a hotel structure that was specifically designated for people waiting for their test results, people who had nowhere else to self-isolate, people who were sick, people from out of town who were brought here for a variety of reasons. And so why couldn't we have a similar kind of structure?
Yeah.
And when we were winding it down, I remember having multiple conversations with senior leadership around the idea that we could just keep this running, but the focus wouldn't be on being about the pandemic. It's actually the focus is that the public health crisis is homelessness, or the public health crisis is poverty.
Yeah.
And so we could actually pivot this model and say that when folks show up in certain circumstances, particularly in the health system, but other systems as well, and they don't have a place to be safe and sheltered, that this would be an option, just a tool in the toolbox, much like homeless shelters are a tool in the toolbox. This could be another tool. And so then rather than discharging to the street, they would discharge to ACES. And ACES would be a multi-jurisdictional, multi-agency space. And that's how we ran it. In the daytime, people kind of were in the hotel coming, and they were isolated in their rooms, but there was also like Ministry of Social Services had income assistance workers there. We were making sure people were connected to whatever services and supports they needed. We had transportation, we had elders, we had like cultural and spiritual supports. We had all of those things at the space. And so we could build a space that was like that. That was not, we're not talking about a homeless shelter. We're talking about a transitional space coming out of one system and going into another system. Sure. I think the issue is that the general population doesn't see poverty as a human rights crisis, and it certainly doesn't see themselves. They don't see themselves in it, and so people can see themselves in what happened through the interagency response, and there was times when people were worried about their own personal wellness and safety, and I think people can empathize and see themselves in the potential of an evacuation situation, and how folks who are in those circumstances are generally not to be blamed for their circumstances.
Mother Nature, as opposed to
whereas if we unpack the idea and the values placed around poverty and homelessness, particularly in this province, but in sort of that sort of conservative narrative, there's a lot of blame and shame and devaluing of folks, where some are worthy of that type of response and some are unworthy of that type of response. And I think the depth of poverty and the depth of homelessness in this community, some folks are unworthy of that response.
I have heard on a few different fronts and conversations that we need more policing. We need more policing. We need more policing. And I think that kind of aligns with the next question that we had prepared, which was one of the biggest contributors to these TAPs is the justice system. So what happens when someone is released from jail without a housing plan?
Yeah, so I'll back up a little bit around. I knew the policing conversation was going to come up, and I've had the opportunity to work with 3 police chiefs now, and a bunch of senior folks who have come and gone, retirement, etc. And there's this underlying narrative that we know and they know, and they've all said out loud, is that we can't police our way out of this circumstance. Yet here we are still having this conversation about policing our way out of these circumstances. And I find it remarkable that senior leaders in policing are saying we can't do it, but there's almost this like, but let's do it that way anyway, instead of really digging into evidence and thinking about, what are the root causes that we're trying to police our way out of. Oftentimes, and I'll channel a previous police chief for a moment, when he said to me, like almost 90% of the women who are incarcerated in Canada are there because of the criminalization of poverty. Very few of them are what you would close your eyes and think are violent offenders. I mean, there are some for sure, but the bulk of them are there for crimes that are about income, right? Crimes that they're doing to try to make ends meet, crimes that they're doing. And I'm not justifying them. I'm just saying that there is this breakdown between how we respond to violent criminal offense and how we respond to the fact that folks can't make ends meet. That the only option that they are provided is to do other things that some folks might portray as inappropriate. So, and then we catch them and lock them up and then create a cycle that just perpetuates it.
Absolutely.
Those kids are apprehended, blah, 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 and the cycle. And so kids that are apprehended fall into that same cycle. And we all know, so speak to folks with affluence and privilege, we all know that we're products of our environment. We all know that we do what we know. Right? That's why you see kids of doctors becoming doctors. That's why you see, I fell into law enforcement. My dad was a cop and I fell into that world and I never wanted to fall into it, but you do what you know, right? It's your normal. So how do you think you're going to break a cycle when you constantly perpetuate that cycle on generations upon generations of folks without constantly thinking, wait a second, like maybe they need meaningful employment instead of the alternative. Maybe we need a guaranteed basic income. Maybe we need better income assistance rates. Maybe we need all of these things so that folks can have enough money to make ends meet, so that the choices that they're provided with are actually choices and not just options.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. And so justice is, I mean, it's a big one. And for me, I feel like probably one of the easiest systems, because you have folks in a space and you know who they are. And so why not work to figure out how, when they're released, that they're released with everything they need to be successful upon release, if that's what we really want, and then shift the narrative around release. So you'll still hear people will be released, and then you'll still hear people talking about how they're criminals. Well, okay, but they've been released and they've done this time and they've done all the things that the justice system requires them to do. And now we're asking them to reestablish themselves with nothing that breaks the cycle of their normal. Right? And so what do you think is going to happen?
Well, and even more so recently than I think in prior years is the fact that when you're released with a criminal record, even if you're on conditional or even if it's completion, then that's used against you in applications for housing. And
employment.
And employment, of course, yeah.
Yeah. And so, I mean, imagine a release from justice system where folks are released with a standard, adequate, consistent income and a housing plan and supports for whatever other services and things they need. So they're going to be in a process of trying to get their kids back. So there's like a reintegration plan, whatever they want to call it, but this sort of unification of family and sort of support around whatever the family needs. If it's a single person, then they get what they need as a single person, right? So it's like equity based and looks at the circumstances of the individual who's being released. And you also have them for a period of time where they can get access to all the paperwork that they need to file to get all the identification that they are entitled to have access to.
And help with filling that.
Yeah, and so there's folks there and they can provide supports and services. So you leave justice with a little package that has all the cards that you're entitled to have: a health card, your driver's license, your birth certificates, your treaty card, whatever it is, all of the things that you're entitled to do. When you leave that day, you have all of your identification.
Yeah.
And I understand like I've been speaking to lots of folks within ministries over the last little bit, that the system is also like they're understaffed and they're under-resourced and all. I understand all of this,
Yeah.
but under-resourced is really just another way of saying like the current model is too expensive to operate the way we're doing. So let's be innovative around what would it look like if we made changes and efficiencies to the current model. I don't believe that resource scarcity is a thing. That's not going to win me any friends. I believe that resource scarcity is a construct that is designed to keep us fighting, to keep us thinking that there's not enough. There's a ton of resources out there. It's just who decides what has value to be resourced and who doesn't.
Having said all that, you say that resource scarcity is not a thing. Certainly you see problems, and certainly you have ideas as to what solutions look like for those problems. So what does a restructuring look like?
And I'm going to go back to the bathtub conversation for a second, because I spent all my time in this like interface of public policy and the way it plays out in program. I am not a frontline worker. Like I think that work is so hard and so amazing. And I feel like periodically I feel like people think I'm critical of it. I'm not critical of the work you're currently doing, because the work that you're currently doing is based on the confines of what you've been provided. What I'm proposing is, what if you didn't have those confines? What if we could blow up the system, disrupt it and dismantle it, and you could do the work that you want to be doing, that you need to be doing, that you know needs to be happening, rather than constantly reacting to the most critical pieces. And so when I say, when I talk about the bathtub, one of the other questions that I pose is that the perspective of vantage point. And so when you look at this overflowing bathtub, there's two little kids sitting in it. One has their back to us, one doesn't. It's kind of looking a little bit like, oh, mom's going to get mad kind of face or whatever. But there's a whole bunch of things that could play out in that picture. And depending on your vantage point and your bias and your privilege and your capacities and your normals, you interpret that photo differently. So the first thing I ask is, how many people in this room are worried that these two children are in an overflowing bathtub alone? Right? Well, you don't know anything. You don't actually know where the parent is. The parent could be looking at this image and standing where you're standing, but you've made a decision in your mind that the parent is absent. That comes from your own interpretation and your own vantage point, a package of your normals. Maybe they're on the other side of the door and they just needed a break. And that statement could also trigger your like, well, that's a bad parent or that's a good parent, depending again on who you are and what your circumstances are. Like there's all these things that you can't see about the vantage point of the photo. And there's a lot of things that you infer based on your own sets of normals. Public policy is the exact same thing. Somebody has said, oh, look, there are homeless people in Saskatoon. Rally the folks together who are smart and let's make some public policy about fixing homeless people. Who do you think is in the room? Whose vantage point is making public policy? Certainly not homeless people. Probably white folks. Probably affluent white folks who are in government positions, because that's what the world looks like. What does an affluent white person know about the fundamental needs of a homeless person living in the core neighborhood of Saskatoon? And so then they build this public policy, well-meaning. I'm not saying that they're horrible people. Well-meaning. I mean, I don't think they're horrible people. Well-meaning, but they don't understand. And the other thing they don't understand is the ripple out. So they're like, okay, well, we're going to build this. Yeah. We're going to put a shelter downtown. Let's pick on the lighthouse because it's gone, right? We're going to put the shelter downtown. So then the lighthouse is established and they do the work. And then people are like, oh, no, we don't like that. We're going to close the lighthouse. That's going to fix it. Yeah. And then they close the lighthouse with no solution. And now you see what's happening. Policymakers are affluent folks. I mean, it's not that some of them don't have lived and living experience of certain things. They certainly do. But for the most part, people are making decisions about resource allocation, about policy developments, in the isolation of the folks that it most actively impacts. I mean, when I talk about public policy, people's eyes often glaze over because nobody really wants to talk about policy. But the crazy thing is that we all talk about policy. So if you're the kind of person that's ranting about something that you don't like on Facebook or whatever, you're talking about public policy. If you don't like what you're seeing play out in the jurisdiction that you're talking about, so I don't like the way bike lanes are, I don't like all of those things are all public policy things. And so we need to figure out a mechanism where folks are engaged in that process. I was recently just at a meeting, a town hall meeting, and someone proposed that government officials and policy folks hold collaborative workshops around public policy. Invite people from the neighborhood, invite people who are impacted by the policy to provide perspectives around whether it will or won't work. The whole notion that you can only write up good public policy because you have a degree from the university and as a policy wonk is ridiculous. I'm not trying to be negative about it. I'm just trying to figure out how we could get better outcomes if we really thought about long-term policy impacts. Some folks, 3% of the population of any system that we're going to design, will always push back. But you don't build public policy for 3%, you build it for 97%. And then that creates a space where you can address the 3%, why people don't want to be housed, rather than saying it's just too hard because they don't want to be housed. That is a very small population of folks. And yeah, they deserve to have that conversation, and we should have a conversation about what they want. But in the meantime, the other 97% who are unhoused are stuck in this limbo because we're so fixated on the hardest piece. Right?
That 3%. They do a lot of damage, you know,
They can.
for other people, for landlords, for business owners, you know, it's.
Well, and I was going to mention that that's a very real part of the conversation happening here in Saskatoon. Donna and I have both heard community leaders say we can't do this because some people don't want this, and they're talking about the hyper marginalized. They're talking about the people that we're discussing currently, and I have to agree that it does stand in the way of what would drive progress in the broader community.
I'm not saying we don't help them, right? But what happens when we also don't have a fully operationalized housing continuum, which means that there needs to be way more tools in the toolbox for folks so that when they show up and need something, they get what they actually need, right? So you can't put folks who have lived rough for 15 years, you can't throw them a set of keys to a 2-bedroom apartment at Evergreen and be like, we're all good. The housing first model says I want to live anywhere I want, and quite often they don't want to live in the core because you know, it pulls them back into senses of normal, because back to the idea that you are what you know, right? And so I want to get out, and so, you know, Evergreen or wherever, and so there's no supports or services, there's no sense of normal there, there's nothing, and folks will not be successful, right? And again, 3% of them might be. But we don't build public policy for the 3%. That's great. The 3% can do that. I don't know how, but whatever. The other 97% are going to fail.
Yeah.
So what is it that we need to do? We need to ask everybody across a continuum, what would shelter look like for you if you could have it? And if some people say a tent at Gordie Howe Park, and that's what they currently need, then we need to be okay with that. It doesn't mean that it's done. It doesn't mean the conversation is done. Okay, you're done your house. You have a tent in Gordie Howe Park. But why is that? Another person might say, you know, I really want to eventually be a homeowner. Okay, well, let's put you on that path. What does that look like? And maybe that is a recovery path, right? Maybe that is whatever. But the path has to be provided when the person shows up, when they ask. And right now we don't have those paths. We have 2 or 3 that are okay. We have a lot of people trying to do the best they can on those paths. But we have so much underfunding in that end of the continuum that we're focused on the idea that if we could just get people into affordable housing. Okay, folks who are rough sleeping and folks who are episodically homeless aren't ready for affordable housing. They're ready for transitional supported wraparound intensive case management housing.
What about the folks who absolutely refuse that as well?
Yeah, I mean, that's, again, that's and it's not a huge population.
No.
So then you need to talk to them. You need to build relationships. You need to have an outreach service. You need to have all the folks that are doing that, like, intensive, hard frontline work. You need to have harm reduction services for folks who need harm reduction services. I'm not an either or. This is a toolbox. So when someone shows up, what tool? Right? If I need to build a house and all I have is screwdrivers, I'm not going to build a very nice house. So what is everything that's needed?
Yeah.
So,
well, and when you were talking about the justice system and you know, how they're not going to police their way out of it. I think of our dear friend Barb Fornsler. She said something to me once: when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail. Right. And we've had this conversation before too, as to where does due diligence end? You know, when we're talking about the 3%, is there a point where we're like, we've done all the things and they still want to cause harm in the community? You know, and maybe that's where the carceral system comes in. Who's to say? I don't know, you know, but something.
We also don't know what will happen to folks when the system stops creating survival mode. That cohort of folks may disappear when they are not marginalized, oppressed, and created and living in a situation where they're required to survive all the time. So I haven't talked about all the TAPs. So like justice and health are the obvious TAPs. Ministry of Social Services, like all roads lead to the Ministry of Social Services, because they hold so many connection points for income, right?
So you want to talk about offering people meaningful employment. You want to talk about not just tossing people keys to a house and saying have a good time here. Now that could come back down to education as a preventative measure here. So okay, we can provide you housing, we can provide you opportunities for meaningful employment, but we need to first provide you opportunities to learn how to do these things.
Certainly.
So what could that look like?
Yeah. So justice, health, Ministry of Social Services are the big players in system TAPs. I remember talking to another colleague who was like, don't leave community out of this. We create our own TAP as well. And we can talk about that after. But the other one that I often flag is education system, the K-12 education system in particular. And people are like, well, how does, and particularly when we're talking about housing and homelessness, like how does the K-12 system, kindergarten to pre-kindergarten to grade 12 system impact housing and homelessness, and how does it doesn't play a role in that continuum? And I said it does. If you define, and language becomes really important, if you define shelter differently. And then I ask teachers, do you shelter children? And they say, well, I guess it depends on how you define shelter. I said, do you tell me, all teachers will say, you know, quite often, this is the safest place for many kids. This is the only place that they get X, Y, and Z. So again, are you sheltering children?
And were they not considering like extending the school year to go the full 365 days for that very same reason?
It's one of the things that the Poverty Reduction Partnership says needs to happen.
Yeah.
But so if we can all agree that between 8:30 and 3:30, kids are safe at school, and sometimes that's the only safe place kids have, then you are providing a shelter service. It's not overnight sheltering. It's certainly not like the Salvation Army kind of sheltering, but you're still sheltering and providing safe, adequate support, affordable space for kids to be. And so if that's true, then when kids start to become problematic, and so flash forward into sort of like the grade 10, 11, 12 years, and maybe earlier, but really 10, 11, and 12, is it legitimate for the K-12 system to be allowed to kick kids out when they have a legislated requirement to provide services in this province under the age of 6 to 20, right? So if you're 17 and you're hard, because 17-year-olds are hard, why is the K-12 system allowed to say, yeah, no, we're done? And when we did a provincial-wide survey of students, young people, sort of the age of 12 to 30, they all said to us, 100% of them said to us, the final straw in my homelessness journey was when K-12 told me I wasn't allowed. They also say, don't get me wrong, we weren't going to school, and we were terrible students, and we were the jerks, right?
Yeah.
100%. They all said that. But when the school said to us, you are no longer welcome here, the last door closed to any support service that I thought I had access to. And the rest of it is history. And I stumbled into increased addiction, increased complexity, and homelessness. Every single one of them.
Wow. This episode of the Speakeasy podcast is brought to you by the Saskatoon Community Foundation. The Saskatoon Community Foundation inspires philanthropy, builds community, and leads change in Saskatoon. The Foundation has worked and served on Treaty 6 territory and the homeland of the Métis people since 1970. We're proud to partner with SCF as we work together to spark dialogue, share knowledge, and build lasting change here in Saskatoon. The Advancing Interprofessional Management of Substance Use Disorders in Saskatchewan program, or AIMS-SK, is offered through the College of Medicine at the University of Saskatchewan and is designed to deepen healthcare professionals' understanding of substance use to improve health outcomes for individuals with substance use disorders. This program consists of 3 modules, including the foundations of harm reduction in substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, and alcohol use disorder. If you are a healthcare professional in Saskatchewan and wish to reduce stigma and better serve those with substance use disorder, look for the AIMS-SK link in the description below. Quick pause here. If you're finding value in this conversation, head over to speakeasynetwork.ca. Every episode is paired with a blog post that dives deeper into the issues we cover, offering extra context and connects you with tools and voices driving real change in Saskatchewan. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to like and subscribe. If you're on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, leave a rating or review, drop a comment wherever you're listening. All this helps more people find these conversations and helps keep momentum going. Now, back to the episode.
One of the reasons why SPRP, the Poverty Reduction Partnership's 12 Bold Ideas, focuses around K-12 is the notion of the policy around how we build the school year. There are lots of places across North America that have alternative school year calendars. And when we first started having this conversation, we could feel some pushback, but it's the same pushback that I hear from other jurisdictions. The first is, well, parents won't like that. So then we talk to parents, and parents are like, oh, some parents don't want it. That's fine. I'm not saying every school needs to have an alternative school model.
Mhm.
But what it would be nice is, again, to have a toolbox. And what if it works for your family to have your kids go to school all year round and to have different flexible holiday times, then shouldn't that be a tool that you're offered? Why does every single kid have to break for the school block? And then the expectation is that community and other agencies pick up the slack.
Yeah.
That is the fiduciary and moral obligation of the Ministry of Education. If kids are sliding backwards in learning through the summer, and we know that their reading levels are changing, then the government is, I believe, morally obligated to fix the system that's creating that output. If you dig into the Ministry of Education outcomes around graduation rates, why are there 2 sets of graduation rates for non-Indigenous kids and for Indigenous kids? Shouldn't we be looking at graduation rates for all kids be the same? But if we push them together, our graduation rates would be so low that it would flag something. So we pull them apart and we recognize that these are the graduation rates that we're going to talk about. And these ones have all this other complexity about it. But also, who picked graduation to be 4 years? Maybe graduation is 5 years now. Maybe kids are in such a state of learning chaos that they need 5 years. Who picked all of the courses that are required to graduate from K-12 in Saskatoon?
And
Who decides physics? Who decides math? Who decides art is not important?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
All of these things are the policy pieces that I would like to question. Maybe you need a certain number of credits. Sure. So like my kids are arts kids. And I remember fighting with the school. Well, they need to take physics 30. I'm like, they do not need to take physics 30.
Yeah.
They took all their requirements. They are never going to be physicists.
Right.
And they're like, well, you're burning a bridge. I'm like, no, my daughter's a ballerina. And here's the crazy thing. She's going to go and do her ballet. And when she's done ballet, if she suddenly wakes up one day and says, I want to be a physicist, it will shock me, but okay. And so then you know what you do? She's now 26 years old. She goes to the University of Toronto and she fills out the paperwork and says, I want to be a physicist. And they're like, okay, good luck with that. Welcome to the University of Toronto. That'll be $9,000. That's how the system works.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And so why are we creating a space that doesn't allow choice for students, that creates a space for so much turmoil for some kids who are not on that path?
Right.
Yeah.
And that is okay. But
And
we've made a
contributing to
decision.
feelings of failure.
We've made a decision that this is the only path out of high school. This is the only way we can deliver school. But we do alternative school models in this city, just not for kids who are struggling. We do it for elite folks.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
So I have an education degree, so I feel a little bit like I can teeter into the policy around education. I also sat as a trustee on a school board for 2 terms. And so I have a fairly decent working understanding for those. There's probably teachers that are going to watch this and be like, we're criticizing the work. Again, I'm going to go back to the teacher level. We're not criticizing frontline work.
Oh, no.
Frontline work is designed the way it is because of the confines of the policy in which you are working in.
Mm-hmm.
So let's back up and talk about the high level things. Can we agree that what we're producing at the end of K-12 is not the same thing as it was in 1955? Yet we are using the same industrial school model, same timeline, same expectations, same process as we were in that timeline. So what could it look like if we really thought and sat down with kids, with their parents, with teachers, with people who are using the system and say, what does a 21st century school system look like?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it might look quite similar for littles because littles like routine. They like to build relationships. They want to have the same teacher, all of that sort of stuff. And as you get older, maybe it looks a little different. My kids flourished in an online world. Your kids may not. But both systems need to be provided to kids. My kid wants to be online. My kid doesn't want to go to school until 2:00 in the afternoon, whatever. What does it look like for kids as they get older so that they actually get access to the things that they want when they want them? All of these tools exist, but there's a reason the system, for some reason, is saying, no, we want to just do it the way we've always done it.
Yeah, all of these things exist, but for some reason, we all have to know how many rings there are around Saturn.
Right? Or
Like, so what?
Pythagorean theorem, which is fine.
And I'm not bashing that. Saturn's cool. I love a good space documentary.
But how many times have your kids and my kids drawn a map of Canada and colored it and labeled it? Like, can we just stop already?
So what can we do differently in our education system? Now, you mentioned some things. We can sit and we can talk to the students and we can do all that. But what could we do to shut that tap off as far in a preventative way? From a young age? Like, how can we bring people into the world so they know how to be in the world?
Yeah, and so we need to move away from knowledge-based learning because we have, whether we like it or not, we have AI tech and a bunch of other tech that knowledge-based learning has dramatically changed from when I was in school. Yes, I had to learn my times tables. My parents still feel it's crazy that my kids don't know their times tables. They don't need to know their times tables because Siri will tell them immediately, right?
You won't have a calculator in your pocket, that's what I was told,
right?
Yeah.
But what they need to understand is when they ask Siri something and they get something back, whether that's
factual?
Logical. Did I just hear something that made sense, or is it wrong? And if it's wrong, how do I process that so that when people tell me things, maybe not Siri, but although algorithms are algorithms, maybe you tell me something and I don't have enough critical capacity to think that doesn't sound right to me, nor do I have the capacity to say to you, you're wrong.
Yeah.
And we're not teaching kids how to do that.
Critical thinking,
but also the capacity to challenge back. Because if I say to you, you know what, you're wrong, I'm worried about all of the repercussions that will come from that statement. And we're growing kids in this sort of state of worry.
Where it's wrong to make a mistake.
Yeah.
I think it's beautiful to make a mistake.
Yeah, and so how do we build curriculum then? And this is their job. I mean, this is what they should have been evolving to do as tech sort of took off, right? Instead, our provincial government makes a decision to ban cell phone use in schools. Like, it's ridiculous. Kids are going to use their cell phones, and so teach them how to use them properly, right? And so how do you do that? I don't know necessarily. I think it really requires a disruption and dismantling of who is controlling the public policy around the education system. And I think back to your question, it's twofold. One, we need to create a generation of kids who come out and have empathy and understanding and critical thinking skills and the capacity to decipher right and wrong based on a very wide range of equity-based evidence. Because some would argue right or wrong is biblical. Some would right or wrong is science. Whatever that is, there needs to be a large spectrum of right and wrong based on an equity scale so that kids are coming through understanding that whiteness isn't supremacy, that the privilege that I've been provided comes from intergenerational wealth transfer, wealth being whatever, privilege or monetary, or social or whatever. And when kids disrupt inside that system, because kids are going to disrupt, because kids are supposed to disrupt. Kids are supposed to be angry and full of turmoil and pushback. And
They're supposed to be?
Oh, they are. Yes, I'm a parent. You're a parent. They're supposed to be not like angry in a bad way, but in a like, you can't tell me what to do because I'm growing. Let me put my feet under me. Let me make decisions. Let me push back. Let me do those kind of things. Kids are supposed to be jerky.
You know what? And that's funny. And I'm going to segue just briefly into this, but it's like, maybe we need to redefine what success looks like.
Yeah.
You know, if I have a son that can grow up or a daughter that can grow up and go into the world and think critically and ask questions, I don't think that they should be taught that is disruptive.
Or disrespectful.
Yeah. You know, and I'm still breaking my own thought patterns that are deeply ingrained. And that was in the school system. I'm listening to Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he's talking about how it's not okay to make mistakes in the school system, you know, and that's very true. It's not okay. You know, you get graded by, you know, these certain data points. And I think that that's causing more harm than good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When we moved here, my daughter was in grade 4, and my grade 4 teacher said on the first report card, she didn't get a very high mark, whatever the mark is in that grade, for independent work. And he said to me, so she's probably never going to get a 4, is that what it is, on works independently because she's actually a collaborator. And as much as that is annoying in grade 4, when she's 35 and the CEO of a large company, collaboration is what they're going to hire her for.
Right.
So as a grade 4 teacher, here's my question. Are you okay with her getting a 2? Because that's what the confine of the system requires me to give her. Or do you want me to break her spirit and make her be an independent worker? And I'm like, leave her alone.
Fantastic teacher to have that insight.
I said, leave her alone. I don't care about any of the marks in K-12.
Yeah.
Well,
because they're subjective too. Like,
and I'm hearing that more and more. In fact, we have a neighbor that has 5 boys.
Yeah.
And we were talking last night or the other night. I don't remember. And she was like, I don't care if my kids get A's. I don't care at all. You know, and I don't really either, but I'm trying to break that in my own mind. Like, is your homework done? Are you getting good grades? Are you
like, a good human being?
Are you a good human being?
Yeah.
Like, what does your day look like at school amongst your peers? Like, what does that look like?
Yeah. And so if we could build an education system that does those two things together, right? Create space that's equity-based, evidence-informed, and it puts the learner centered, which they'll claim they do, but they don't. And fix the fact that once you're in that K-12 system, you're there for that period of time that's legislated. So then it's the education system's responsibility to make sure that your outcomes are positive. So you can't kick kids out of school. Because I have kids in that era. They're 23 and 21, and I watch their friends and I watch them, and they are not equipped to be adults. Yeah, I'm barely equipped to be an adult. But they are lacking skills that are required for this era, including the idea that you are taught all of the things that you need to do around how to be a successful homeowner or how to be successfully housed.
Yeah.
You don't just wake up and know how to do those things. And so if you have been a victim of intergenerational trauma, if you have had all of those things removed from you, if you've been apprehended as a young child and have lived in foster care upon foster care upon foster care, the likelihood of you picking up the nuances of those learnings are slim to none. And then we hold you accountable as an adult and say, why can't you do this? I had this conversation with a senior leader from the housing authority who said, isn't it a parenting issue that kids can't keep, or that 3% of the population who landlords don't want to serve, is that a parenting issue? And, you know, much to the dismay of some of the folks around the table, I said, okay, let's entertain that for a second. So maybe it is. If it's my kids, it probably is, because they came with affluence and privilege. And so if they do something wrong, it probably is my fault to some degree. But if you have a person who has lived in foster care, like 15, 20, 30, 70 foster cares,
Yeah.
who are you holding accountable? The parent. Who's the parent in that scenario? Because there is a parent.
It's the government.
It's the government. And
Yeah.
so I said the parent is the ministry,
Mhm.
that they allow a young person to have that trajectory,
Mm-hmm.
that
Yeah.
there's no stability, because we know littles need stability.
Yeah.
We know they like to build relationships. We know that they attach.
Mhm.
And when you have no attachment your entire young years,
Mm-hmm.
what do you expect adulthood to look like? The point in time homelessness count data this year highlighted some young folks. That was one of the first times that number has been fairly high. And you can hear the chatter sort of coming out through community, like, whoa, there's kids. We need to do something. There's kids. And so all of a sudden, because there's a certain demographic that triggers that charitable model in your brain,
Mm-hmm.
now people are starting to say, oh, well, maybe we should do something. But at what point did we lose track of like they're young people, not kids, but young people who are on the street that we've decided are not worthy. But now there's a 10-year-old or a 12-year-old. And so now somehow there's worth.
Mm-hmm.
And we need a situation where homelessness is rare, brief, and does not reoccur. I mean, that's the functional zero definition. I know people will teeter in and out of homelessness. Will it be obsolete entirely? I mean, in theory, if we lived in a really well-taxed, lots of meaningful employment and more social space, we probably could eliminate it. But in the current confines of our government system and conservatism and capitalism, probably we will never eliminate homelessness, but we can make it rare, brief, and not reoccur. There aren't that many people in Saskatoon that we can't hit that target. That when you fall in, there are immediate resources that provide you supports and services to pull you out, rather than the current model, which is when you fall in, we push you deeper.
So let's switch gears here a little bit, and let's talk about emergency shelter options, and how that's contributing to the bathtubs filling up, especially around youths or families who want to stay together.
So back to the original map that coined the term system tap, when we really played out on paper what was going on in Saskatoon, it was very clear then that we actually didn't have an emergency shelter in Saskatoon. And we still don't really have an emergency shelter in Saskatoon.
That's right.
A barrier-free 24-hour basic shelter. We do not have one. So you have to qualify essentially for the enhanced shelters that we currently have. Again, they're great. Enhanced shelter is important, but we're missing a fundamental piece of the continuum, and that is basic shelter.
So you're talking about Salvation Army. You're talking about, is Mustard Seed?
So Salvation Army, Mustard
Wellness
Seed,
Center.
Wellness Center, Lighthouse, all of YW, all of those folks are enhanced shelters.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
There is no basic shelter. If you showed up today at Station 20 West and said, I need somewhere just to sleep tonight, there's
There's
nothing.
nowhere.
I mean, we'll put you to the Salvation Army. But there's also expectations there,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so it's an enhanced shelter. It's an important piece of the toolbox, but we don't have the first tool. So we need a basic in Saskatoon. Hear us loud and clear. We need a basic shelter that is funded by the government, that is barrier free, that provides overnight, 24-hour overnight shelter so that people can show up, get what they need, and it connects them to services or not. And it has to be barrier free.
Mhm.
You do not have to be required to get connected to service to go access it. Once you have that, then you have enhanced sheltering, and so people can move from the basic shelter into the enhanced shelter. You have a bunch of different funding models. Everyone's doing really great work, from what was the Lighthouse to the Salvation Army to Mustard Seeds to the Wellness Center. They're all doing great work under their own sets of policies and regulations, right?
Mhm.
Mm-hmm.
And then you need to have some sort of transitional space where people can leave shelter. Because if people are living in emergency shelter for 250 days, you're actually a transitional housing model. That is not shelter. You can't
Mhm.
live somewhere that's called shelter for 250 days because emergency shelter is not housing.
Mm-hmm.
So what does it look like next? And so you'll see some really amazing options in Saskatoon. like Codawin, which is the new STC space behind Station 20 West, where we have transitional housing where folks are sort of moving to the next step. And then once they are really well established there, then, the next step is to move them out into something a bit more housing related, a little less focused on intensive case management and supports. And so you move folks through this continuum, noting though it's not like a success ladder by any stretch of the imagination, although I would argue that we need to get people out of emergency shelter and into transitional housing. And if that's as far as they go, that's great. But if folks can move out of that and into affordable housing or into whatever, then they should be encouraged to do so. That way the continuum sort of flows and we always have availability in each of the areas that people need. And when the Lighthouse was proposed to close, I remember lots of conversations. Like, if we build an emergency shelter that has 9,000 beds, they will come. But is that the city that you want to live in? And I remember talking to senior leaders, like, if you build a shelter with 9,000 beds, like, is that what you want? Check, we're done. And then what? Like, shelter's not housing. So then if we start focusing on how do we move people through, then we really need to start talking about intensive case management. Who is providing what services to whom? So then we need all of the tools for every single type of demographic that might show up. And so we also need an emergency shelter option for families and families with pets.
Yes.
Well, and that's where this line of questioning is coming from. Like, how is not having these things in place, an emergency shelter, how is this taking families apart, and how is this turning the tap on higher?
Yeah, so if you had a 24-hour drop-in basic shelter that had a couple of kennels for dogs, because it's mostly dogs, if you had that, we would have been able to avoid a situation this summer where a mom and daughter were together. We could have found them sheltered together, but there were dogs. And so the daughter stayed with the dogs and slept outside for 4 days while mom got shelter and sort of got more stable and then came back and then they left. But they should have been housed together in a shelter and the dog should have had a space somewhere.
So how does having something what you're describing available, how does that reduce the load on other parts of our system?
Yeah, so I mean, while that was going on, Station 20 West carried the brunt of the support for her. We made sure she was safe and fed and the dog was taken care of. That's not our job really, but we do it, of course, because that's what shows up. And then they get access to services while they're there. And when people are taken care of with the needs that they present with, they're more likely to be successful and build relationships and go the next mile. Whereas if they're like, we'll take you, but not your dog, like, it's like, oh, we'll take you, but not your kid to some folks, right?
Absolutely.
And other people can't get their head around that. Well, that's fine. That's their vantage point. And then we need to have like the conversation around harm reduction and recovery. And there is, again, another continuum inside there. And so there isn't one, it's not either or, and there isn't one solution that's individual to each person. You will go through that continuum, right? And so you might recover and be good for 2 years and relapse. That can't be held against you, right? So how do we build capacity so that when or if that happens, you get what you need? You're not cut off because you were like, oh, well, you got this service and support, but now you've relapsed, and so now you're a bad person, so you must go this way, right? That kind of stuff. And if you show up for recovery that day, we need to move you down that path today.
Yes.
Because if you show up and say, I'm ready, and we like, meh, and how do the folks that are offering some services for detox play a role in that? Right? How does the Idlewild Center, which is really just a catch and release, how do they play a role in figuring out how to connect them? And I know they are working on that, but it needs to be much more methodical.
Yeah. Well, and you need to be arrested to get into there.
You need to be arrested to get into it, yes.
So now we already sort of talked about this, but let's talk a minute about centralized intake. It was designed to make the system more efficient, right? Yeah. But you've talked about a few different things today that really call that into question, and you've also talked a little bit about what's going wrong, with things like not being able to take your dog, not being able to and access a shelter as a family. Again, like how can we fix a centralized intake so that it's efficient?
Centralized for who, I guess, is the question I always ask. So like this is tied, I guess, to coordinated access as well in my brain. So this is the idea that, yes, there's a point of contact. Is it a single point of contact? So are you talking about centralized access for how, not you, but like the general public, like it's a policy. Is it about the centralized intake is at Station 20 West, say, and that's the only place it is, so everybody has to come there? Or are we talking about the idea that it's coordinated access, so you can go anywhere, no wrong door, and the door you go into knows that centralized intake is at Station 20 West. And so they navigate that centralization for you, as opposed to the client or relative having to navigate it by themselves. And we know without a doubt when people have to self-navigate, they do not.
No.
Yeah.
See. And so the no wrong door policy has been around for ages. It just seems to not want to get implemented. And so the idea is, if somebody shows up at Comfy or the Wellness Center or the Salvation Army and it's not the right place, that they're not told no, that they're told go here, or we will take you there. That's the other thing, is how do we get the navigators from other agencies who are doing intensive work navigating for folks to be able to drop what they're doing to bring someone to a different space if they're at the wrong door. So that the no wrong door is actually about the client doesn't know that they're in the wrong space.
Okay.
So many service providers feel alone and burnt out. And what is the one thing that they can do today, even without new funding, to help reduce harm and keep hope alive?
I mean, we saw burnout. We keep seeing burnout, but all through the interagency response. And the one thing that we were focused on, and this is what this sector does, is that they focus on the service delivery model and the folks, relatives, clients who are coming to visit to get access to service. And they rarely internally refocus until something bad happens. And when something bad happens, there needs to be a mechanism in place that then wraps the same types of supports and services that they're providing to their relatives and clients, that wraps around their staff. And slowly we're seeing this emerge. We know big agencies do things like CISM, so critical incident stress management work. We implemented that inside the interagency response. So they have a executive director's team that will wrap external services and supports around. So if something terrible happens at Prairie Harm, a group of folks will come together and wrap supports and services around their colleagues. But we need to make sure that those agencies are resourced, not only to operate the service and support that they're providing, but to be able to operationalize their own staff. The other thing that was very obvious in that era and right now is that many of the folks who are working inside these systems have the lived and living experience of the system or service that they're providing. So they're working at Prairie Harm and they're in recovery. They have family and active substance use. They have personal lived experience. So every single person who comes through their door is like their own family. And so that amount of energy that is taken when it's constant turmoil and constant survival mode. And that's what Kayla talked about recently at the council table. It's like you can't be expected to constantly revive your friends and family without supports and services. And so we need, as much as benefits and support services are built into the fire department, into nursing, all of those big agencies they understand this component. The community sector, and particularly the community sector around homelessness and housing and substance use, does not have the capacity or the resources to build it into their operating model, and so they need it.
Well, and I think the question is, like, what can service providers do? And what I'm hearing is that when someone's saying that I'm struggling, well, we can believe them.
Yeah, we certainly can.
Right?
Yeah.
We can practice empathetic workplaces.
Yeah.
We can listen to people when
Yeah.
they're venting. I mean, there's been times in my life where someone listened to me and I don't know if it would save my life, but it sure felt like it did in the moment.
Yeah.
You know?
Well, and when the library in Prairie Harm closed recently, Station 20 West kind of got together, the board and the staff, and said, okay, so we can't replace these two services, but we're going to carry the brunt of some of the outflow of this because we're the only one now that's open in the little area. And so what does that look like? And so we went to both of them and said, okay, this is what's going to happen. What can we do to like help you navigate the next 3 weeks while you're closed? And that's when things happened, right? That's when we decided, okay, well, we can start training people with naloxone. That's easy. Might throw the doors open, give them some snacks, and get some trainers, right? And we put out a call to people and said, look, we cannot replace this service. We're not suddenly going to become a safe consumption site. That is not happening. But people are going to continue to use, and it's going to become problematic. And so we need people to understand what that looks like, what their role in is as community members, and how they can at least offset potential risks with overdose.
So what I'm hearing you say is education would be another way that we can support service providers.
Yeah.
So, because it seems that a lot of people don't know what to do except to continue putting out fires until they fall over.
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So-
and then digging into like higher level. So I'm always like reluctant to put more things on service delivery frontline folks' plate. But there are those of us who are, a step out of that world, where we can infiltrate other steps out of that world. So the idea, like I often take med students or I often take practicum students into the poverty reduction partnership, because it's not a frontline practicum placement. If you want to do your practicum with me, then you're going to do a policy practicum. And then you're going to take this back into your world, nursing, medical, whatever. And you're going to hear lots of really great stories from your colleagues around how they helped folks at the food bank or helped people at Friendship and all that. And you're going to share your policy practicum with them. And it's going to disrupt some thought process around how you volunteer. What does it mean to work in policy instead of the practical charitable model? People need to have those experiences as well. But also when you have a med student come to you and say, okay, I want to do a policy briefing, tell me what your number one concern is. And I say medical discharge. And he has no idea what I'm even talking about. Like, what do you mean medical discharge is because they're done with health? I'm like, yeah, you go and come back.
Okay.
And now he's a physician. He's written a policy briefing for me, and he understands completely what I'm talking about around medical discharge at 4:00.
Yeah. Okay. So, and
That's
there's another education point there that could, if people understood what happens on the outside of the doors of the institution they're working in, that could help them make better decisions. And maybe if they could streamline their systems, that would help service provider burnout.
Maybe.
It's that ripple effect that you were
It's
referring to earlier.
it's the ripple.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I know my head likes to make up stories of things that I don't know, and that can burn me out all on its own. I can have fights in my head all day long and not have anything left for the real world.
Yeah.
So I think that I'm seeing a strong need for education, and taking a step back. Like, look what Prairie Harm did. As tragic as that was, that they had to do that, they did it.
Yep.
And sometimes, maybe we could leave that with service providers as well. Like, you cannot fix everything.
You're also allowed to say no.
And another valuable
Right? And often
point.
we don't.
Yeah. No, sometimes you have to say no for your own wellness.
Yeah.
Like if you burn out, then people are going to keep falling in the river, right?
Well, Donna from Station 20 West is going to hear me say that you can say no. And she's like, I've never heard you say no.
I love Donna.
But that's okay. Donna, we can say no sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's say there's some frontline workers listening right now, sitting in their car, long shift, feeling, like nothing is changing. And quite frankly, change is happening on a very, very slow and sometimes backwards facing trajectory.
Yeah.
What would you like to say to them? How can they help? How can they contribute to your work? What would you like to leave us with today?
Oh, frontline workers are the warriors in this work, right? And I think when I run into them on a fairly regular basis and talk about systems work, the one thing I get from them is this relief that somebody's paying attention to the things they wish they could be paying attention to, because they are so head down, next client, next person, next whatever.
Mm-hmm.
That they know all of this is happening and they know what they could do to fix things, but they have no capacity or no levers to do so. And so oftentimes they'll say to me like, oh, I'm just happy that somebody is talking about the high level things.
Yeah.
And then I think the other piece of it is that when they can show up to certain policy level things, to show up and make sure their voice is clear. That means, though, taking time away from the frontline work, which is often quite impossible to do.
Feels impossible.
It feels impossible, but also sometimes, I mean, maybe it's a good mental health break too, to step aside and really like bring your perspective to a policy conversation. Because it is that ripple piece. I am not a frontline worker. I don't know what it's like to work at Prairie Harm in the consumption site. So if someone from that world doesn't come into my world and talk to me about it, I can go there certainly, but that's often more cumbersome for me to show up and be like, so tell me about your day. And they're in the midst of 3 overdoses and all that kind of stuff. Right.
Absolutely.
And so trying to figure out how to best get access to that information and to participate in sort of that collaborative knowledge sharing and evidence sharing so that I have enough ammunition and enough evidence to go the next step, to write the next report, to host the next event, to put the pressure where it needs to be placed, because that's the role that we play.
Where can people find you?
Well, the newest thing in my world is that the Poverty Reduction Partnership has a website now. We're like 1987. So the poverty website is endpovertyYXE.ca.
I'll link it in the show notes.
Yeah. And then just email is the best way to get a hold of me.
I'll put your email in the show notes. Okay. Colleen, thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Hold on. For more context and tools tied to this episode, visit speakeasynetwork.ca. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave a comment or review wherever you're tuning in. It really helps. And if you're ready for more, go ahead and click on the next video right here on the screen.